Interpersonal sources, a role model who provides care and reflective space. Marcus' formation as a leader obviously takes place in a social context with several social variables, including his colleagues. Yet in his story, one construct stands out in particular. I will suggest that the phrases "I bought into the person before I bought into the vision" and "my leader has more influence on me than anything else" have great heuristic value. It seems beyond doubt that Marcus views his leader as a role model that inspires commitment to a moral cause. Yet, the fact that Marcus bought into the person before he bought into the vision might imply that their relationship is more important. In this relation, the senior leader shows moral concern for Marcus as a whole person. This means that he's not only a role model in front of Marcus, but he appears as a caring person in an I-you relationship with Marcus. This also seems to inspire the same kind of moral affections in Marcus. Overall, this interaction gives the leader a form of authority that enables him to correct Marcus' at least sometimes unhealthy task orientation and tutor him into balancing and more care-oriented practices like counseling. The leader seems to stimulate Marcus' inner dialogue by asking questions and by proposing alternatives that helps Marcus to see himself in a new perspective. This kind of intellectual stimulation also seems to be involved in the way the leader handled the conflict that emerged with Marcus' vision of a separate youth church. The leader brought in external consultants, he was willing to enter into dialogue, and more importantly, he gave Marcus time and space to reflect for himself. This can be seen as a provision of what might be called reflective space that accepts a degree of ambivalence and enables moral reasoning. In sum, according to Marcus, his leader is 1. A serving role model, 2. An intellectually stimulating tutor, and finally 3. A provider of reflective space. This inspires Marcus to identify with a moral vision, evokes a serving attitude, and enables him to develop a form of moral, responsible, critical loyalty. Intrapersonal sources, moral reasoning, and meta-thinking. It's crucial to note, however, that reflective space is more than a gift from the leader. It's also something that Marcus, as a follower leader, actively co-creates. As we have seen, this normally happens in solitude and in dialogue with his leader. Reconsider the following passage. I need to have a day every week where I'm kind of doing other stuff than I do in my work. I love to go to the library and find books on different subjects. It often gets into time management or leadership, and I sit there and I love it. Yet, although he loves it, his inner dialogue is also his toughest struggle. It should be noted that Marcus in crisis situations also opens up his inner conversation by writing letters to God or seeking support from his wife and by discussing with his senior leader. This seems to suggest that he constructs his reflective space differently depending on situation and context. Why is this important? I will suggest that Margaret Archer's sociological research on people's inner conversations may provide valuable insight on how moral reasoning may emerge. She suggests that people roughly perform their inner dialogue in 3 ways. Although people may employ all 3 forms, one mode is normally dominant. Communicative reflexives resolve ethical questions in interpersonal conversations with similar and familiar others. This group of people will also display a tendency to be conformists. It seems quite clear that Marcus does not fit into this group, since he normally, though not in crisis, seeks solitude to reflect. He also seems to challenge the social order. It's more difficult to decide whether Marcus is an autonomous reflexive or what Archer calls a meta-reflexive. Both of these types normally seek solitude to reflect. The major difference between the two, according to Archer, is that autonomous reflexive are primarily orientated towards task-orientated achievements, whereas meta-reflexives are value-orientated idealists who more and perhaps almost constantly think about their thinking, hence meta-thinking. I will suggest that Marcus shows many signs of being a meta-thinker. Although he is absolutely capable of pragmatic, strategic reasoning, he values values to the degree that it has led him into a vocation. More importantly, Marcus' inner debate on the new organizational paradigm and the dangers of comfort idolization shows that he's capable of criticizing the organization and at the same time think critically about his own thinking in light of the Christian horizon. I will suggest that this capability of meta-thinking, or thinking about his thinking, in light of values, is essential in terms of enabling Marcus to perform the diverse way of moral reasoning that has been presented so far. However, I will also suggest that there is a tension between autonomous, strategic reflexivity and eta-methical thinking in Marcus' inner dialogue. This might be seen in his reflections on getting most out of life, as well as in the fact that he needs feedback from his leader or his followers to repent from insensitive forms of task-focused leadership that may cause him or others to burn out. However, when this happens, he is able to take a step back and think critically about himself, though sometimes to the degree that it becomes his toughest struggle. Interestingly, Archer claims that many of her respondents have become meta-reflexives through crisis experiences that followed from defective socialization, illnesses, or forms of geographic relocation, where they were forced to select values and think critically about themselves and the social order. From the passage that was presented, one might ask if Marcus is a productive strategic thinker in good times, as in his post-vacation mode, whereas he becomes more of a critical meta-thinker when tensions in organizational life create different forms of ambivalence in his inner world. Research shows that ambivalence is a common attitude among middle managers, in particular as a response to organizational change. For highly reflective co-workers, organizational strategies and ideas are always debatable, especially in a world where alternative ideas are only a keystroke away. However, I will suggest that ambivalence also may emerge from a more fundamental conflict between different levels of moral goods. The many tensions between organizational objectives and human relations, including conflicts between organizational objectives and responsible self-stewardship, cannot be easily resolved. Dialogue and creative moral reasoning that seeks to create win-win solutions will therefore face difficult dilemmas that unavoidably produces a significant degree of ambivalence and uncertainty. In the case of Marcus, these tensions are necessarily not solved, but at least handled by the double critique that I have presented. It's worth noticing that these reflections includes systematic reflections where the relationship between organization and person is seen from a third perspective. Marcus' willingness to see the tension from all sides might enable him to find win-win solutions. However, it's also worth noticing that this willingness makes him more exposed to ambivalence. He will feel more tension than a strategic individualist who always tends to set his own interests before that of the organization. And he will also feel more tension than conformists who uncritically sacrifices their individuality or strategic creativity for the sake of established organizational objectives. In other words, to embrace this kind of moral responsibility includes the burden of ambivalence. Furthermore, I will suggest that Marcus' structural positioning as an upper-level middle manager may intensify this experience of ambivalence. Unlike first-line leaders, he's not in the pole position to suggest strategic changes. Yet, unlike a lower level of leaders, he's still a visible leader, at the center of attention in the organization. This implies that he has to show enthusiasm and inspire others to give time and resources to the organization within the present paradigm, while he's struggling and discussing it in his inner dialogue. From Archer's more extensive studies and this case study, one might suggest that both communicative and autonomous reflexive might benefit morally from employing metathinking more often in their reasoning. Yet, one may ask if metathinking needs to be complemented by more communicative forms of reflexivity. In her critique of Lorenz Kohlberg's concept of post-conventional thinking, Carol Gilligan claims that men reflect in a detached and self-protective mode, whereas women tend to a larger extent devote themselves to the moral responsibilities of caring that emerge in relations. Phenomenological research and proximity ethicists will also argue that our most basic, proto-intentional moral affections emerges in the experience of becoming ethical responsible and vulnerable in the encounter with the other's face. For these reasons, one may suggest that detached metathinking should be balanced by experiences of being morally present with and for the other. This mode of ethical formation may in particular be beneficial in terms of developing the virtues of servant leadership that Patterson promotes: altruism, care, and empathy. Put differently, leaders must learn to be there for the actual other. It is not enough to articulate and reflect on visions of the common good. Hence, it's also possible to imagine different combinations of detachment and proximity in moral reasoning, so that reflexive spaces may be constructed in many different ways, depending on context, situation, and personality. In this sense, Marcus is a model, but not the model for the rest of us. Conclusion and suggestions for further research. In my analysis of the story of Marcus, I have identified three qualifiers of moral leadership. Firstly, a transformational commitment to a moral cause. Secondly, serving care for actual others. And finally, a form of critical reflective loyalty that also seeks to deal with tensions between moral causes and care for actual persons. This case study also suggests that these virtues are formed by at least four factors. Marcus' moral character is shaped by 1. Identification with an ethical horizon narrative. 2. A sense of a calling which is renewed through different forms of liturgical and self-liturgical leadership. 3. Interaction with a leader who serves as a role model that provide care, stimulate intellectually, and provide reflective space. 4. The emerging leader also contributes to this process by co-creating reflective space and by engaging in critical and self-critical metathinking. Finally, I have suggested that second-line leaders are located in a structural position that may trigger this kind of ethical metathinking. Yet, this is a proposal that, like other findings in this single case study, call for further research.